My name is Maria, and for much of my early life, existence was a relentless struggle, a quiet, grinding war inside a small body. At 26, I was an artist in a bustling city, painting small pictures, flowers on shop walls and window signs. The work was demanding. My back ached from hours of standing, my fingers stained with colors that weren't mine. The earnings were meager, coins that felt heavy with disappointment. I lived a solitary life in a tiny room, a box with a single window, without family or friends, my parents having passed years ago in a silence I still carried. My sparse belongings, a bed with a thin mattress, a single wooden chair that wobbled, a small table scarred by previous occupants, a single fan that whirred like a tired insect, offered little comfort, especially during the sweltering summers that pressed the heat through the walls. My diet was a dull routine: plain rice, dry bread, occasional watery soup. Luxuries like restaurants or new clothes were not even dreams. They were imaginary countries. I hoarded every dollar with a desperate fierceness, sometimes foregoing dinner, my stomach a tight knot of emptiness. And though nights often ended in tears, I choked back until the pillow was damp. Each morning I rose, my body moving on a stubborn will I didn't understand, ready to face another day. This was my quiet, often desperate reality, a life painted in shades of gray and beige. One particularly cold, rainy morning, the sky the color of old bruises. As I put the finishing touches on a cafe window, my hands numb and red from the chill, an older man entered the establishment. He appeared to be in his mid-60s, with thick gray hair and a long black coat that seemed from another era, moving with a deliberate, careful slowness. He chose a table near the door, his gaze drifting from the rain-streaked window to me, to my hands shaking slightly as I worked. I quickly averted my eyes, my cheeks flushing with a familiar heat of being observed. I was accustomed to keeping to myself, to being part of the scenery, not its subject. When I finished and began cleaning my brushes, the cold water biting my skin, he rose and approached. My heart gave a nervous thump. A gentle, kind smile softened his features, carving lines around his eyes. "You look very tired," he observed, his voice quiet and calm, like dust settling in a sunbeam. I offered a small, weary smile in return, a reflex. "It's just been a long day," I admitted, the words feeling too heavy for the air between us. He simply nodded, a deep understanding in that simple motion, acknowledging my effort, then simply walked away, leaving me standing there, a strange, hollow feeling in my chest where his kindness had briefly warmed a space. The next day, I was painting a wall near the same cafe, the sun harsh now, when I saw him again. He smiled, a small, consistent curve of his lips, and I instinctively smiled back, a real one that surprised me. He offered a small wave before disappearing inside. Later, as I wiped sweat from my brow, he reappeared, carrying a small cup of steaming hot tea. "This will warm you," he said, not asking, just handing it to me. My fingers curled around the porcelain, a shocking, beautiful heat. "Thank you," I whispered, a strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through me, starting at my hands and moving inward. No one had ever shown me such a simple, thoughtful kindness. This became a daily ritual. Robert, as I soon learned his name was, would bring me tea, sometimes a piece of buttered bread wrapped in a napkin, or small, bright flowers he said were from his garden. He never asked intrusive questions, never made me feel uneasy with his gaze. He was consistently, bafflingly gentle and respectful. I found myself, to my own shock, anticipating his visits. A quiet, nervous joy would bloom in my chest whenever I saw his figure approaching, a joy I immediately tried to stamp down. Don't be foolish, Maria. Despite the significant age difference, a canyon between our lives, his presence brought an unexpected comfort, his eyes always warm and understanding, like two pools of still water. One afternoon, the air thick with impending rain, Robert sat with me on the low wall outside the cafe, his expression unusually serious, the playful lines gone. "Maria," he began, his voice lower, "I want to talk to you." My breath hitched. "You live alone, without family, and your life is incredibly hard." He stated it as a fact, not a question. I looked down at my hands, at the paint under my nails, the small cuts and calluses. I was unable to speak, my heart pounding a frantic, frightened rhythm against my ribs. "He sees too much." "I want to help you," he declared, the words simple and immense. "Why?" I managed to ask, the words scraping out of my tight throat. I looked up, meeting his gaze, searching for a lie, a trick, the hidden hook. He offered a small, soft smile that didn't reach the seriousness in his eyes. "Because I care about you," he said, each word deliberate. "And I truly see you." He then stood, the movement slow, and urged me to consider his words before he walked away, leaving me sitting on the wall, the world tilting around me. That night, in my silent, lonely room, his words echoed, loud and confusing. "I truly see you." No one had ever expressed such genuine care, or looked at me with such profound, unsettling understanding. What did he mean? What did he want? Fear, a cold, slick feeling, coiled in my stomach. The following day, he found me as I was packing my things, my hands trembling. He handed me a sealed white envelope, crisp and clean. "Please read this," he requested, his tone leaving no room for refusal. "And think about it." Fear and a desperate, clawing curiosity warred inside me as I held the unopened envelope, my heart racing as if I'd run a mile. Later that night, the single bulb in my room casting a weak yellow light, sitting on the edge of my thin bed, I finally opened the letter. His handwriting was neat, precise. It detailed an offer. He would pay for my room, help with food, assist with finding me better work. He stated clearly, firmly, that he wouldn't ask for anything in return. Yet he did have one request. He wanted to marry me. The word marriage slammed into my chest, sending a violent tremor through my whole body. Marriage? Sleep was impossible. I sat by my window, listening to the rain begin again, a cold, steady drumming that mirrored the chaos in my mind, my heart a heavy, painful stone. Was he serious? Was this real or some cruel joke? My life was a constant, exhausting struggle, a meager existence with no support, no net, no future. Here was an offer of stability, of help, from a kind man. But marriage? To a man older than my father would have been? Was this love, or simply a desperate, practical arrangement? I recalled his gentle demeanor, his thoughtful gestures. He had never asked for anything before, never touched me beyond handing me a cup. Was this the right path, or a beautifully wrapped trap? The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to go to work. A first. I reread the letter countless times, the paper growing soft from my touch, pacing the tiny confines of my room until I felt dizzy, my mind a screaming whirlwind of what if, and why me, but the hunger, the loneliness, the endless tiredness. That afternoon, Robert appeared, standing outside the cafe door in the pouring rain, not under the awning, getting soaked, his smile small but unwavering, waiting. I walked towards him slowly, the letter clutched in my hand like a talisman or a sentence. "I read it," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rain. He waited, patient as a stone, for me to continue. The water dripped from his hair, his coat. I looked at his face, the kind eyes, the wet gray hair, then down at the slick, dark street. My future in one direction, my past in the other. A choice. "I will marry you," I said. The words didn't feel like my own. He remained perfectly still for a moment, as if not trusting what he heard. Then his eyes softened, a deep, profound kindness spreading across his face, and a genuine, relieved smile broke through. "Thank you, Maria," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. There were no grand gestures, no embrace, no celebration, just two people standing in the cold rain, a quiet, terrifying understanding passing between us. He suggested a small wedding the following month, just papers, a ring, a promise. That night, back in my room, doubt screamed at me. Had I sold myself? Had I made a terrible practical choice? Would I find safety or a gilded cage of regret? "Time will tell," I whispered to the dark, the words of fragile hope. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a slow, anxious blur. Robert gave me space, not visiting daily, which felt both like a relief and a new kind of abandonment. I continued painting, trying to occupy my mind with strokes of color. But his words and the impending faceless wedding loomed over everything, a dark shadow. I had no one to share the news with, no one to ask, no new dress to buy. The loneliness of the decision was its own weight. I found an old, simple white dress in the back of my closet, washed and ironed it until my arms ached, and added a plain white ribbon to my hair. That was all. It felt like a costume. The wedding day arrived under a flat, cloudy sky. I walked alone to a quiet, official-looking building on the city's edge, my heart a trapped bird. Robert waited outside, dressed in a simple black suit, holding a small, neat bunch of flowers from his garden. "Hello," he greeted me, his eyes taking me in. "You look very nice." "Thank you," I replied, my voice thin. We walked inside together, my legs stiff. Only 5 people were present, his old friends, I assumed, silent, nodding figures. The ceremony was simple, quiet, no music, no cameras, just our hands, his warm and dry, mine cold and damp, our eyes, and 2 plain, cool silver bands. Robert promised to care for me, to provide for me, always. His voice was steady, sure. I replied, "I will try." The words were a vow and an apology. With the rings exchanged, a strange, tight weight on my finger, we were married. Robert looked at me, his eyes soft, searching. "Let us go home," he said. No applause, no cheers, just a quiet, dreamlike transition from one life to another. His house, a short drive from the city, was small but sturdy, with old, thick walls and large windows looking onto a green patch of land. It smelled of old books, flowers, and polished wood. Books lined the shelves in friendly chaos. Comfortable, worn chairs invited rest, and thick red curtains warmed the rooms against the gray day. "This is my house," he said, placing my small bag down. "It's your house now, too." I noted its profound, echoing quietness after the city's constant hum. "It's very quiet," I said, and my voice sounded too loud. "Yes," he affirmed, a hint of a smile. "But it is safe." Safe. The word hung in the air, a promise I desperately wanted to believe. That first night, in a large, impossibly soft bed in a room of my own, sleep eluded me. I stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, feeling like an imposter, a guest who had overstayed before even arriving. I wasn't afraid of him. He had respected my space, not even entering my room, his kindness a constant, confusing blanket. But I was profoundly unsettled, unmoored. The question echoed in the silence. Is this truly my life now? The next morning, I found Robert already in the kitchen, sunlight streaming in, tea and fresh bread prepared, a small cup waiting for me. "Good morning, Maria," he said, as if this was normal. Our meals were mostly silent, but it was a different quiet than my lonely ones. A comfortable, shared silence, not an empty one. Our days settled into a gentle, predictable rhythm. He made the morning tea. I began to help in the kitchen. He tended his garden for hours, often singing old songs softly to himself. One rainy afternoon, he brought me a cardboard box. Inside were storybooks, fairy tales, books of poetry, their pages soft with age. "These are for you," he said simply, "if you'd like." This simple gift was a key. It opened the door to more conversation. Tentatively, I began to ask questions. About his garden, the names of the roses, the herbs, about his past. He spoke of a quiet life, no previous wife or children, a former bookseller who was now content with his plants and his reading. His stories were gentle, undramatic. His voice was soothing. But always, his eyes were consistently, reliably warm. One evening, as we sat listening to the radio, he said out of nowhere, "I am very glad you are here, Maria." The statement was so plain, so sincere, that a new warmth, different from gratitude or fear, stirred cautiously within me. "Thank you," I replied, and this time I almost meant it. The following morning, I woke and, before I could stop it, a faint smile was on my face. The sun was bright. The bread he offered tasted sweet and soft, not just like sustenance. He showed me his garden properly, speaking of soil and seasons, of nature's patience. We sat on a small bench, and I spoke too, about the stories I was reading, about a bird I'd seen. He listened, really listened, and smiled. He never questioned my past or dictated my feelings. He simply received them. This quiet respect touched a deep, lonely place in me. Slowly, I began to see him not just as an older man, a benefactor, but as a person, a genuinely kind soul, someone gentle, selfless, and seemingly incapable of harm. One starlit evening, sitting on the porch holding my tea, the air cool, I realized I felt a profound sense of safety with him. Not just physical safety, but safety in my silence, in my thoughts. And perhaps something more than just help or security was slowly, tenderly blossoming between us, a companionship. The next day, as we fumbled together making a soup, a laugh burst out of me, a real, unguarded sound, when he spilled flour on his nose. He looked shocked, then chuckled, a rich, warm sound, and our laughter filled the small kitchen. In that moment, I no longer felt like a guest. I felt, for the first time, part of the home, part of an us. Later, walking alone to the small market, I overheard two women, their voices sharp as needles. The young one with the old man, Robert, pretty thing. Must be for the money, poor dear. Or maybe she's simple. The words hit me like a physical slap. Shame, hot and nauseating, flooded me. I fled, the bread forgotten. Robert, seeing my pale, shaken face when I returned empty-handed, asked nothing. He just gently touched my hand, a brief, grounding press. "Words mean nothing, Maria," he reassured me, his voice firm. "They are just air. I know who you are." Though my eyes welled up with stinging tears, I didn't let them fall. He knows who I am. But who was I? That night, the question tumbled out. "Why did you help me, really?" He looked out the window at the stars, silent for a long time. "Because you needed kindness," he said finally, turning his gaze to me. "The world had forgotten to give it to you, and I had some to spare." Those words, they didn't absolve my shame, but they resonated deeper than any declaration of love could have. No one had ever offered such pure, unconditional kindness. The next morning, I got up first. I made the tea, my hands steady, and brought a cup to his bedside. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with sleep. And this time, my smile came first. Weeks turned into months of calm, peaceful days that built upon each other like soft bricks. We shared stories, meals, and a quiet companionship that became the fabric of my life. I observed his eyes now, seeing not need or power, but a genuine, growing care. I no longer wished to run or hide. The thought of leaving this warm, quiet house, of leaving him, caused a small panic. I wanted to stay. I wasn't sure if this frantic, protective feeling was love, but it was certainly more than just help or duty. It felt solid, real. One day, Robert went to the city on an errand. The house felt unusually, oppressively quiet without his humming, the soft rustle of his newspaper. I missed him. I watched the road. When he returned, he had a small bunch of violets in his hand. "Just for you," he said, holding them out. My heart did a quick, funny leap in my chest, and I smiled so broadly my cheeks hurt. That night, holding the simple silver necklace he'd given me weeks ago, "No occasion," he'd said, I felt a peace so deep it was like sinking into a warm bath. "You seem happier lately," he observed from his chair, his book in his lap. "Yes," I affirmed, looking right at him. "I think I am." I was, no longer lost or desperately alone. Each day felt softer, better. We gardened side by side. We baked a terrible lopsided cake and laughed, and I even painted a small corner of the kitchen wall with climbing ivy. He stood and admired it for a long time. "It's beautiful," he said, and his voice held awe. My eyes, he noted one morning, looked brighter. I felt stronger in my body, in my voice. As seasons changed and the garden exploded in a riot of blooms, Robert and I sat by the crackling fire one chilly evening. The silence was rich, full. He gently took my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. "Are you happy, Maria?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the question holding the weight of our whole story. I looked at him, at the kind face, the hair now more white than gray, the eyes that had seen me at my worst and offered only tea, and I knew I had to give him the brutal, beautiful truth. After a long moment, I confessed, the words clear and loud in the quiet room. I married you for the money, for the safety. I felt his hand stiffen slightly, but I held on. But now, I continued, my voice softening, filling with a certainty that shook me. Now I stay because I want to, because I choose to, every day. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, his eyes shimmering in the firelight. Then he slowly reached up and touched my face, his palm warm against my cheek. I leaned into the touch, and then, without thought, I leaned further. Our lips met for the first time. It was not a kiss of passion, nor of obligation. It was soft, warm, slow. A kiss of recognition, of a long journey ending where it was always meant to. A kiss of love, patiently grown. That night, for the first time, I did not sleep in my separate room. Lying beside him, holding his hand in the dark, my heart felt incredibly light, as if it could float away. I once had so many doubts, I whispered into the space between us. I know, he whispered back. Now I feel everything, I said, a tear escaping and tracing a warm path to the pillow. He shifted, leaned over, and kissed my forehead softly. So do I, my Maria. So do I. The days that followed were both the same and utterly transformed. They were slow and calm, yet every color seemed brighter, every sound sweeter. We laughed more, deep belly laughs. We tried and failed at new recipes, making a glorious mess. We walked outdoors, his hand firmly in mine, not for support, but for connection. We talked about everything and nothing, about our childhoods, about fears, about the silly shapes of clouds. One day, at the market again, I heard the sharp whisper, "That's her, the gold digger, married old Robert for his house." This time, the words didn't land like a knife. They landed like dull pebbles. I didn't flee. I slowly turned, met the woman's eyes, held her gaze until she looked away, flustered. Then I turned back, picked up my basket, and walked away, my head held high. I was not their story. I was my own. When I told Robert, a flicker of anger crossed his face, for me, before it settled into calm. "People talk when they don't know the truth," he said, squeezing my hand. "But we know the truth, you and I. That is enough." I believed him, and for the first time, I truly, fully believed in us. We continued building our simple, profound life. We made jam from the garden berries, our hands sticky and red. I painted more flowers, on canvases now, not walls, and he built a sturdy garden chair for two, where we often sat as the sun set, hands clasped, hearts open and quiet. One morning, bringing him his tea, he took the cup, then captured my hand. He brought it to his lips and kissed my knuckles, his eyes closed for a second. "Thank you, Maria," he said, his voice thick. "You are the light in this house." I felt the truth of it in my bones. "So are you," I replied, and I meant it with my whole soul. When he fell ill with a fierce winter chill a few weeks later, a cold fear gripped me, sharper than any I'd known. I cared for him, making soup, reading to him, watching over him as he slept fitfully. The thought of this warm, kind presence leaving the world, leaving me, was unthinkable. It was in that fear that I found my final certainty. When he recovered, weak but smiling, he said, "You stayed with me. You nursed me." "Of course I did," I said, smoothing his hair. Then the words came quietly, naturally, like a breath. "I love you, Robert." It was the first time I'd spoken those words aloud to anyone since my parents died. His eyes, still tired, welled up instantly. He pulled my hand to his chest, holding it over his heart. "I love you too, Maria, more than I knew possible." The next day, I painted our garden from memory, the flowers, our chair, 2 cups of tea on the small table. He framed it himself and placed it by the front door. "We will see this every day," he declared, "and remember." Many seasons passed. The love between us didn't blaze. It deepened, quietly but strongly, its roots reaching down into the dark, fertile soil of shared years, patience, and kindness, as steady and enduring as the old garden wall. I no longer felt poor or lost or like a guest. I felt loved. I felt strong, within myself and within this partnership. One golden afternoon, many years after that rainy morning at the cafe, we sat in our garden chair, his hand, now more lined, firmly in mine, looking at the sky smudged with peach and purple. "You saved me, you know," he said quietly, not looking at me. I turned my head to him. "No," I countered, the old defiance now sweet. "You saved me." He finally looked at me, his eyes the same warm pools, now crinkled with 1,000 smiles we had shared. He smiled, that gentle, knowing smile. "Maybe," he said softly, "maybe we saved each other." And I knew, with a certainty that was the foundation of my life, that it was true. What began as a marriage of necessity, of desperate survival, had been patiently, gently watered with daily kindness until it blossomed into something far greater, a real, enduring love. It grew slowly, in the quiet spaces between words, built on a foundation of respect and care. It was a love that showed me my own worth, not by shouting it, but by reflecting it back to me every single day, in a cup of tea, a held hand, a defended truth. Sometimes the most beautiful things in life arrive when you are least prepared for them, dressed in unlikely packages. Sometimes love finds you not when you are looking for it, but when you are simply trying to survive. And it transforms what appears to be one thing, a transaction, a shelter, into something utterly beautiful, real, and worth cherishing forever.